So it's 2020, and is the Sony a7 III still worth it? So if you are new here, my name is Jacob Scott. I make photography and filmmaking videos like this one every single week. So if you're interested in that, go down below, hit the subscribe button, as well as the bell notification to be notified when I drop a new video. But with that out of the way, I've been using the a7 III for close to 2 years now. Now, when I first bought it, I was sort of on the market for, I think I was looking at the a7 II, and then I was continuing looking, and I realized, oh wait, Sony just dropped a brand new camera, the a7 III. And at the time, the camera pretty much destroyed anything and everything in the price range, and still is a very, very good competitor for the money. Now, that being said, nowadays you have the ESR out there, you have Lumix, the Panasonic one, I don't remember the name exactly, and you have Nikon's. So the question is, why would you choose the a7 III in 2020 over some of those other cameras? Well, starting with the pros of this camera in 2020, and then we'll move into some of the cons and some of the things that I found with 2 years of using this camera. Pros, number one, Sony, the low light is absolutely amazing. It's insane. I've had times where I will turn up the ISO and it's dark, and the camera can actually see better than what I can see standing there. Secondly, the autofocus is actually incredible on this camera. That being said, it's probably not quite as good as full frame Canons. Now, previously, before this camera, I was using the Canon 80D, which is a crop sensor camera, and I find the fact that this one's full frame, it lets in a little bit more light. It seemed like this one actually focuses a little bit better than my 80D, but I've used a couple full frame cameras, full frame Canons since, and the full frame Canons autofocus is absolutely incredible, but I'd say this is a very, very close second, so extremely good autofocus. Third, it has dual card slots. Pretty much nothing in its price range that's competing with it has dual card slots, and that was one of the biggest reasons that I bought this camera, because I was starting to do more and more professional work, and it's really important to me to be shooting on dual cards. I'm actually shooting dual cards right now, even when just shooting a YouTube video like this, just to have that assurance that if one card happens to fail, because I have had some cards that just don't like to work well at all, I know that one card is always going to be there as a backup. And the battery life is actually really, really good on this camera. And previous Sonys before this one, most previous Sonys, you could not say the same thing about them because they were kind of notorious for having horrible, horrible battery life. And there's also a couple little things, like, of course, it being full frame. That was one thing with this camera that I wanted to move up to, because at the time I was shooting crop sensor and I was looking specifically for full frame cameras. It shoots 4K, and in 24 frames per second, it shoots it uncropped. So that was also something that was very, very important, having uncropped 4K to be using that entire sensor. And little things just like it has a headphone jack, it has a microphone input, things like that was also things that I was looking for in a camera. And honestly, one of the absolute biggest pros of this camera in 2020 specifically is the lens selection. The lens selection for this camera is not only getting really good, it's also getting really, really affordable for what you can get out there. I remember when this camera first came out, I was looking at EF lenses, and the price of EF lenses just kept dropping and dropping and dropping. I'm like, should I just go ahead and get just a Canon full frame DSLR? But now Sigma's releasing an entire lineup for this camera, and Tamron has released almost a full set within 3 lenses for this camera, with a, I believe it's 17 to 28, a 28 to 75, and a 70 to 180, and all of that is across 2.8, that entire range. And all those lenses except for the 70 to 180 is under $1,000. So you can get all 3 of those lenses for, I'm pretty sure, under $3,000, which is an extremely good price. Granted, $3,000 is still a lot of money, but for what you're getting, it's an extremely good price. Let alone if you want a little bit higher end stuff, Sigma has released quite a few art lenses for this camera, and again, that's going to be at a pretty good price compared to Sony glass. But even still, I've noticed that Sony glass price is not all that bad like it was originally when people were looking at this camera. But there's no such thing as a perfect camera. Now, for the most part, this camera has been close to perfect for me when using it. Now, of course, it doesn't have a flip out screen. That wasn't really a huge issue for me. I currently use a small HD monitor on top of my camera to be able to monitor when doing YouTube videos like this, and I don't really vlog all that much. But there's also a little things that I've had issues with. One, if shooting in 4K, and I live in Florida, so it gets really hot, really sunny outside. If you shoot for long periods of time, the camera can overheat if it's in direct sunlight. Now, that I've only had that happen 1 or 2 times in the whole 2 years of using the camera. Would I say that it makes the camera unreliable? Not at all, because I pretty much know if it's going to happen. And for the most part, when I'm shooting outside and shooting for that much of a duration, I'm normally shooting in just 1080 anyways to save up card space, and in post to just make editing that much easier with that. And I haven't had it overheat at all in 1080. And one of the other things that I've had happen one time is I had a battery say battery exhausted. I honestly have no idea what that meant, but I went home, charged the battery, plugged it back in, and haven't had the same issue since. And that only happened one time. And the final kind of con for me is the colors. Previously coming from Canon, the colors are not as good as Canon, nor are they as easy to work with as Canon's colors were, because for the most part, you really didn't have to do much to Canon's color. And I will say this, I've been experimenting with some new picture profiles, and it actually is not really, I wouldn't say it's bad, it's just not as good as Canon from what most people are coming from, because honestly, most people out in the video community have either shot on Canon before or are coming from Canon into a mirrorless camera. But this really isn't a video to run down the spec sheet. The question is, why is it still worth it in 2020? The answer is yes, but the reason being is, one, like I mentioned earlier, the lens selection for this camera is getting really good, and like I said, really, really affordable. Secondly, the price that it's still at, it still is an incredible camera for the price that it was even still released at 2 years ago, because there's still cameras in the same price that cannot do everything that this camera can. Now, of course, the Canon EOS R can do 4K as well, but it's doing it cropped. Sure, it might be at higher bit rates, but it's not doing it with dual card slots. Or this camera over here, there's always some sort of compromise, which I feel the compromises that this camera makes, to me, are not as important as what the compromises of other cameras are making. So really, when it comes to it, you really have to decide what are the compromises you're willing to make. I was not really willing to make with getting a professional camera to make a compromise on dual card slots or not being able to shoot full frame 4K. Now that may be completely different for you. And also I wasn't willing to make a compromise on not very good autofocus. But maybe you don't need autofocus, and maybe the Panasonic would be the perfect camera for you. That being said, this is still an incredible camera in 2020 for the price that it's at, but it really comes down to what's gonna work for you. But that's pretty much it for this one. If you agree, disagree with me, let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think is worth it in 2020 when it comes to cameras. And I'm really interested to see what Sony is going to release to sort of combat the new Canon EOS R5, because knowing Sony, they tend to massively undercut the competition, seeing what they did with this camera. But that's pretty much it for this one. I'll see you later.